we can perhaps begin. This is a panel on China, a second part. We have some new faces, except for mine, on the panel. We have former members of the last month's panel in the audience to provide us perhaps with some additional background. We are going to allow each of the panelists someplace between 5, 7, maybe 10 minutes to make a few remarks, and then go back through the panel one more time to see if anybody has any responses to what other people have said in the panel, if they haven't included it in the remarks. And then we'll open it up for general discussion from the audience, which we may or may not, if you have questions, we may or may not be able to enlighten you. Or if you have a commentary, that will be welcome as well. My name is Adrian Bennett, and I'm in the history department. I teach Chinese and Japanese history here. To my left is Professor John Wong, chairman of the marketing department in the Business College. To my immediate right is Ge Shaojia, who's in sociology. And to my furthest right is Guo Yimei. I'm sorry. Looking at the wrong list, yes. Jin Katang, he was on the panel last week. I'm not paying attention here last time. So we have two repeats and two new faces here. I'm sorry. I wasn't looking at my notes and not looking at the faces. I will begin, and then we will move to my right, and then back to Professor Wong at the end. And I will try to monitor us so we keep on track, so we have some time for questions and comments. I would like to make two basic statements here. One revolving around the issue of the crisis in China in terms of the old guard versus the new, younger generation that is clearly wanting a different approach to life, to the organization of society. And the other point I want to talk about is make a few remarks about the sanctions issue that the United States is debating, with the Congress coming up with a whole list of sanctions as opposed to President Bush's more go slow or more moderate approach. I concluded my remarks last time by saying that in the long run I was optimistic that things would change in China for the better. And I still hold on to that, but I will have to also say that for the short run, things do not look good, and things are getting worse in the sense of the controls that are coming down, not only in terms of the repression and the rounding up of the dissidents, or the so-called dissidents, from the establishment's perspective. The roundup has been, I think, hushed up considerably. We have not heard of any executions, and we hear very few now about even the finding of the more people on the 21 most wanted list, and we don't know how many more arrests are going on. They basically silenced the press on this, so we don't really know what's happening here. So that the repression and the thought control mechanisms are going back into the process that we saw in the Cultural Revolution. That is, political studies becoming very important for either to come to the United States to study and also to begin to educate the youth in Marxist, Leninist, Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping thought is also being reinstituted, and the liberal bourgeoisie, or bourgeois liberalism, is being very quickly attacked on all fronts. In fact, the latest issue, today's issue of the Christian Science Monitor, has a long article about this very point, the kind of control that's coming through. Nevertheless, I still remain optimistic. This is the last stand of an old generation. I believe the younger, youthful generation is impatient. I think the cards are stacked in their favor. And I think we've seen in this April, May, June demonstration in China several major changes that will make for a different situation. For example, this movement was a very popular movement, and it was also very widespread. It was not just in Tiananmen Square, it was not just in Shanghai, it was in many areas of China. And Margaret Stanley, who was in Xi'an during the incident and is in the audience today, has just come back, can perhaps later add some remarks to this to demonstrate or give an example of how much support there was for this movement in smaller areas in China off, more or less off the main track to some extent. But this movement did connect groups together. For example, students in Tiananmen Square demanding that the press to tell the truth were joined the next day by journalists with slogans that they want to tell the truth. So immediately there was identification here of different groups rallying together. Another area is, I think, that the press, as we know now, and we saw if you watch Nightline and that sort of thing on late night television during the week before and the week after, the press was very open for about a week and was very sympathetic after May or during May to the demonstrations. In fact, even after Li Beng declared martial law, the People's Daily, which is the official voice of the Chinese Communist Party, was carrying news of the demands for Li Beng's resignation, which was completely out of context of what they would normally report in the news. So there was a great deal of openness here, and journalists were allowed for a brief moment of time to explore issues on a sort of using Deng Xiaoping's famous quote, to seek truth from facts, and went the whole hog with it, and tasted, in a sense, what journalism is all about. The other area is the fact that I think the intellectuals of China have organized themselves, or at least they did, for the first time in a massive demonstration that was the first time the intellectuals had really directly confronted the party and the establishment. And they basically responded to the various threats to them by refusing to bow, basically using the slogan, the more you repress us, the more we will peacefully oppose you. There were 3 petitions circulated, for example, in China, protesting the imprisonment of various figures from earlier movements. The first 2 petitions failed miserably, did not achieve anything, did not free anybody, except that the government came down with very heavy warnings to this group that they did not want to see this happen again. The 3rd petition within 24 hours was circulated and signed and sent back to the government, and this time it had 43 signatures, 1 more than the other 2 petitions had, with a very direct message that you do this, we'll just add on 1 more person to our list. Again, directly challenging authority. I don't know how far you can go with that kind of thing, but there was this, and I think you can see it in the student marches. Every time the students marched, the government would come down, make an evening statement. The next day there would be 10,000 more students in the square. Every time harsher penalties came, more people rallied to the cause. And of course, I think the underlying thing about that one can, I suppose, hope for changes is that China's problems are incredibly complex at this moment, both economically, mainly economically, both in the rural areas and in the urban areas. The corruption issue is still outrageous in China. The inflation rate is at 20, 30, in some places 40%. The desire for political freedom has been whetted by the economic reforms. The government wants to continue the economic reforms. They do not want to have any more Western bourgeois liberal thoughts come in with those reforms, but it's very difficult, as we know, to separate technology from value or value from technology. The Chinese think they can do it. They insist upon it. Westerners have been bringing in this information. The Chinese have been craving this information, the knowledge, the technology, the managerial skills, and it's not going to be very easy to separate these 2 things out. Nevertheless, the Chinese want it, and that's their latest. They tell us that business is normal in China, business is going on as usual, please come and trade, but don't bring any of your bourgeois liberal ideas with you. And it's very difficult, I think, for Westerners to sort of nicely leave that in Tokyo or Hong Kong or someplace when they come through the gates of China. So the problems of China that stimulated most of these reforms are continuing, and they're getting worse. And if you want to look at some newspaper clippings, say from the Asian Wall Street Journal, you can see all the issues coming up in the agricultural area, where peasants have been getting paid IOUs from last fall, are getting paid again in IOUs this fall. That's not going to go along very far before the peasants begin to want some cash, or they refuse to grow the grain or grow the grain and sell it on the black market rather than sell it to the state for an IOU, which is going to create havoc, since the government desperately needs the grain to feed the people in the cities. Now, the other point I want to make, and I'll just do this very quickly, is that the sanctions is on the sanction issue. And I think my view at this point is that, and maybe Professor Wong will say more about this, is that the sanctions really, the stuff that's been voted in both the Senate and the House, are really going, if they actually went into effect, will really harm the overall situation. Because the Chinese, for one thing, can blame the United States for any economic consequences that occur in China, can blame it not on themselves for their own economic decisions, but blame it on the United States. We become a scapegoat. You can unify the people around that issue, forget about the reforms, forget about the corruption. You have an enemy out there, the United States, and look what they've done to us. They have created all these things for us, and now everybody has to bite the bullet, and you can rally people around that issue. And we know what the propaganda machine can do in China. If they can pretend that June 3rd didn't happen, then they can easily paint the United States into a very hard corner to get out of. So I think the sanction issue is a very difficult one for us to negotiate. And I think Bush, I'm amazed at myself here, but I think Bush is right here that the go slow attitude is much more appropriate. The other point that I would like to add here is that that unilateral moves by the United States, as I've suggested, will be detrimental to the U.S. position vis-a-vis China. And the U.S. policy, I think, needs to reflect the fact that economic change and global interdependence have powered in China the kind of changes in the reform issues, the demands for political and social progress in China. And it doesn't really make any sense to turn off these engines of change and then expect China to have political reform, which is what we're trying to do here. We're trying to force them to make some changes by putting down all kinds of economic sanctions. And yet it's the economic context, the trade relationships, those are the things that actually have powered this change mechanism drive, and now we want to say cut all that off. Well, it puts China right back where they were before, and we don't have there is no avenue of pushing new ideas into China. And also China, I think, is creating its own sanctions by the various statements, such as the one about the Western businessmen must separate their values from the techniques that they're bringing in. And also the new party secretary argued very recently that China must reverse widening disparities of wealth by, quote, strengthening the authority, the functions, and regulations of the government through legal, administrative, and economic means, end quote. That kind of remark does not sit well with the foreign business community. I think the foreign business community already recognizes China is a high-risk area. They already are backing out. Professor Wong could probably say more about this as well. They're doing their own sanctions just because they're not going to get any profits out of this. They're likely to lose their shirts. Nobody knows how far this purge is going to go in China, how long it will last. It's a very unstable situation. Why put your money into it and hoping to make a few bucks? There are other countries that can provide you with similar, perhaps, opportunities. Well, let me stop with that, and we'll turn it over here to Mr. Ge, and he can talk for a few minutes.
In order to discuss the future of China, I have to go back to trace some of the reasons of the students' demonstrations. And I think there are several levels at the international level. The opening up of China to the outside world for the 10 years has give Chinese the opportunity to see the striking difference between the East and the West in terms of the standard of living, and also the mass media getting China also let Chinese know there's the general communist crisis in the whole world, especially in Eastern European reforms and the Soviet Union political reforms, and also the relaxations of the confrontation between mainland China and Taiwan brought lots of Taiwanese back to mainland, and also give the mainland Chinese the opportunity to see the difference between the different systems between Taiwan and mainland China. Also, domestically, the economic reforms, as just Professor Bennett talked about the economic reform. Before 1984, the economic reform was proceeded within the political framework, the existing political framework, that is Soviet-style centralized planning economy. However, after 1984, there's lots of problems emerged because of the existing political framework in China cannot keep up with the economic reform. So there should be some of the political reform to complement the economic reform. So in the last year, there's a lot of different proposals for the economic reform, but the government, even they open up the discussion of political reform. However, they didn't set any agendas of political reforms for the existing political system. Then last year, when I went back to China, there's lots of different proposals for the economic reform. Reformers argued that since 10 years of economic reform, Chinese economic system get lots of differentiations and diversity. So the economy moved to the pluralist kind of system. However, in the political arena, there's even any change to cope with the fast changing economic situation. So that is the main reason why there's a great debate among the intellectuals to discuss about the political reform. Also, they use the intellectuals because of the high pressures from government, not allow the intellectual to discuss directly on the political problem. So they use a kind of a wrong strategy to discuss the Chinese culture. So during the 1986, 1987, 1988, there's a very hot debate on the Chinese culture. Some of the extremes advocate positions that the wholesale westernization, but on the other extreme, there's a group of people we can label leftist. They argue their positions that they will uphold the four cardinal principles. That is a principle of adherence to the socialist road, Communist Party leaders, and Marxism, Leninism, and Mao Zedong thought, and the proletarian dictatorship. So these two extreme positions had a very hot debate. Also, some intellectuals go even further to discuss the whole Chinese culture should be changed. So under this circumstance, some of the intellectuals argue that the economic reform, since there is a great inflation rate and great governmental corruptions, they argue that the economic reform cannot go any further without a political reform. That's why they advocate the political reform. That's also the background of the students' demonstration. Also, there are some immediate reasons. On China's campuses, I think the China's campus is the most sensitive focus of the Chinese students' democratic expectation. Since the students was most movable part in China, everyone got a work unit. You cannot move freely because they are not allowed by the government to move freely. So the students was a part which not attached to any work unit. So they are less dependent on the government. That's why the students become the vanguard of these demonstrations. It's not to say the workers, peasant didn't agree with the students' position. It's only because the workers and peasant are more dependent on their work unit, so they are not in the advantageous position to join the demonstration in the first stage. After discussing the reasons of the students' demonstration, I would say a few words about the future of China. I think in the immediate future, the situation will be worsening, since the recent newspapers and all the information we got signaled that the Chinese government, especially the top leadership, was trying to go back to the kind of model of the even model of the Cultural Revolution. Now they try to indoctrinate their Marxist Leninist Mao Zedong thought, and every work unit they have a political study every afternoon and ask everyone to show their support to the government crackdown of the students' demonstrations. And yesterday I received a letter from my brother, who's an associate professor in Beijing University. He said now the intellectuals just they avoid talking about anything sensitive, avoid talking about anything which involved politics. And the intellectuals, especially some very well-known intellectual, was arrested, and students was called back to the universities and asked them to show their support. If they didn't show their support, the government will not assign the job for them, for especially the students was graduating. So all the situations shows that the Chinese government tries to go back to the model of the Cultural Revolution in terms of the political reform. So the question should be raised is, how about the economics? I think if they didn't have any political reform, the economy, even before the students' demonstration, already reached the impasse. Even last year, the different proposals, for example, like the responsibility system, like even the shareholder systems, if there is no any political reforms, the economic reform cannot go any further. Adam mentioned that you cannot separate the technology from the values, and also you cannot separate the economic spheres from the political sphere. So my argument is that without any further political reform, that China was doomed to go back to the Stalinist style of the communist rule. And also, Deng Xiaoping's speech also signaled that positions. Deng Xiaoping, in his speech before the massacre, he said that this demonstration was reflections of the war environment and the small niche of small environment in China. What he was talking about, the old environment, is that he will say that the Eastern Europe and Soviet Union was go to a kind of a revisionist of the Marxist. So he was trying to stand to withstand all the pressures and try to just hold back China firmly in the positions of upholding what he called the Marxism.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tang.
Thank you. I just want to say a few words. What I'm now most fear about is the truth coming out of China. As we know that a month ago we know the truth and we know the government are lying, but now we don't have the source that can report the truth. All the information that we get now are from the government, which is really kind of worried me because we don't know if, I believe the government is telling the lie now. All the information we are getting is the lies. If our thinking and our judgment are based on these lies, it can lead to us to a very dangerous direction. And personally, I don't know if there's any solution to this. This worries me very much. Let me tell you something that I just heard yesterday. This is from a faculty member. She's a faculty member in one of the university in Beijing, and she's in charge of one of the class which is supposed to graduate this May. And she told a friend, and her friend is now in the US. That's how the story came to me. And she said that all the class are called back to the university because they have to graduate. This is the class, the senior class. They have to graduate because the situation 2 months ago, it was delayed. And when the students are called back, those whose name on the blacklist, who are the backbone, I will say the gubanfens in Chinese, who are the leaders, are warned, arrested immediately. And there's some other who are the activists during the student movement. They have to wait until they were not issued a diploma or issued a job until their, I'll quote, problem are clear. That means they have to report to the government all their activities, to confess, to have other witness to say they are not a serious hooligans, whatever, with the student demonstrator. Then only after that they can be issued a diploma and a job, because in China the students are issued a job, they are given a job, and if the government don't give them, they don't have a job. And for those students who didn't participate in the demonstration, they also have to write a report to show their loyalty to the government's action to suppress the demonstration in China. This is just one example. Another, I think most of you have already heard, see from the news yesterday. Also, Xiaojia just mentioned that the government is now trying to have another propaganda movement. They said that the Marxism education of Marxism is the top priority of the education. And you can see the situation is still not improving at all. It's still going to the bad direction, still going to the extremes. Let me just tell another news that a friend, a student here at Iowa State, his passport is supposed to terminate. He needs the passport extension. And this is new. Maybe many of our Chinese students don't know this news. And he called the Chinese consulate in Chicago, and they said 2 months ago they stopped to extend our passport only before they can extend our passport for at least 2 years. But now they said our students have to have our units or our school back in China, the unit's permission. Even after they have the permission, they can have their passport extended. So you can see the students here in the U.S. Are facing quite a pressure, because if you don't have a passport extended, it's really a pressure putting on our students. As to just talking about this safety of students, I just want to maybe because the media coverage is very little. Now the news things going on in U.S. I think some of you already know that the Senate and the House have already, actually Senate has already passed a bill which propose a stronger, harsher economic sanction toward Chinese government. And together with this bill, there's also some more consideration about the safety of the student in the U.S. And I heard the Senate passed a bill that said that will extend deferred departure to from 1 year to 4 years. And I think many of us really appreciate this action. And it is believed that on this Thursday, July the 20th, the House will pass a similar bill, the so-called Nancy Pelosi bill, and which also will try to waive the 2 years requirement, home country residence requirement for those who are holding the J1 visas. And this, I think, this action are really welcomed by the Chinese students here studying at Iowa State and all over the U.S. Now I believe this bill will be passed on this House, and it will send to the jointly by the Senate, both Senate and the House, to the President Bush. And I hope that President Bush will not veto this and to show some sympathy and to sign this bill. Let me just give my response to what Dr. Bennett just said about the economic sanction. I have to say that I have a very complex feeling about the economic sanction. One thing is, as just Dr. Bennett said, open door is very essential to the reform, to the future of China. And if you close the door, everyone close the economic door, then you are closing the political, even also the political door. It's you are taking the Chinese back to the 20 years ago. But on the other hand, what I believe now is the Chinese government now is not there to, they are not willing to go back to that that period of time, and they are still saying they want the economic reform. So I do not see the danger that if the U.S. or the Western country, after they do impose the economic sanctions, the Chinese will really go back to there. It will only push more, put more pressure on the Chinese government. I think I made that thing clear. It will put pressure on the government, but it will not impose the danger that most of our fear, which will close the door of China to the open to the outside world. So I personally support the economic sanction at this point. So in that sense, I also welcome the senators voting on the harsher economic sanction. I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor Wong, who has 8 levels of notes here now.
As I was listening to the thoughts of the other panel members, I thought rather than repeating some of the issues already covered, I would delete some of the, not go over some of the comments that I have prepared, but to share at a slightly different level. There are different responses to incidences in China. I'm not an expert on political science, nor an expert on Chinese affairs, but I responded personally when I was there in Beijing during the crisis. But before I even go any further, I'd like to express my appreciation for to many of you in the gathering here, those who called my wife at home and gave her support when I was caught up in the events in Beijing, and was much comforted by the fact that many of you do care. A little bit on the background of my trip to China and what I saw, and also some of my reflections since I have returned. I organized a group of faculty and business executives in Iowa to conduct a series of workshops in China with the idea of aiding the Chinese government officials as well as managers of the quasi business and quasi-governmental commercial enterprises to do business with Americans. Just as I had conducted workshops in the States teaching American executives how to conduct business in China, it was brought to my attention that perhaps we should do a reverse workshop in China to help Chinese officials know what to do besides saying ni hao when they come stateside or when American executives go to China. And so last year I was in China conducting a series of lectures as well as preparing the groundwork for the workshop series this year. And we left Ames on the last week in May and had a stupendous week in Hangzhou, East Central China. We had about 120 some people. Most of them were government officials as well as business executives who attended the workshops. And we kept up with the situation in Beijing and wanted to make sure that it was safe to go out to Beijing. And we read in the papers as well as being told by our contacts in Beijing that things were coming down. That in fact on the Tuesday before the bloody massacre on Sunday, that most of the students had already left the square. They had an informal agreement with the government and both sides were trying to save face. Students would return to the campuses and the government would drop charges and so on. And so that was quite a I think, unexpected turn of events, at least from the Chinese within China, as we had known it at that point. So we proceeded to Beijing on Saturday, June the 3rd. And when we arrived at Beijing, we were told our contacts that things had suddenly taken a rather ominous change. 3 students were run over by a military truck the early morning hours of June the 3rd. And that students who insisted on the return of the bodies so that they could perform the rites and mourning and so on at the campuses were denied the request. And so from the remnants of about 3,000 students, the square was again flooded by literally tens of thousands of students as well as other supporters during the late morning and early afternoon. While when we were in Beijing, I decided that it would be good opportunity to visit with some of the student leaders, having collected some money among family and friends here in Ames. I caught a cab and went up to Tiananmen Square the afternoon of June the 3rd, Saturday, arriving at the square with some friends about 4 o'clock, and it was impossible to get near the square. We were about a mile and a half on Chang'an Avenue, west of the square, and which incidentally was the site of the bloodiest fighting between the troops as well as the students and Beijing residents. We were unable to get close to the square simply because of the mass of people. I took pictures of demonstrations as well as there were buses that were carrying military personnel dressed in civilian clothes. I got close enough to hear the arguments between the students and the military personnel. In fact, there were dummy floorboards in the buses where the students unearthed or uncovered a cache of military equipment, guns, and ammunition and so on. And things were turning pretty ugly. And by 6:30, our driver decided that it was time to leave because more and more people were flooding the square as a result of people being off work and it was getting dark. And so I attended a banquet that was held now in our honor in the Friendship Hotel. Fortunately, we scheduled most of the meetings at CUN Hotel about 5.5 to 6 miles west of the square, northwest of the square, and quite a few of the meetings at the Friendship Hotel near the universities. And after the banquet evening, I tried to catch a cab to go back to the square, but I had been told by a few of the cab drivers that things could turn fairly nasty that evening, and that I should stay in the hotel and for my own safety. And for that particular advice, I'm grateful. Otherwise, I would be another statistic in the events that followed. News blackout was put into place that evening, and something that happened to the TV. I was told by friends who stayed with us at the hotel was something that they hadn't seen for a while. Whole night long, the military command in Beijing had made announcements for advising people to stay indoors, not to get out, not to get involved in demonstrations or anti-government activities. Otherwise, if things got out of hand, the government would not be responsible. And fearing that things could take a ugly spill as a result of a couple of calls I made, I had arranged for transportation to take some of my American colleagues to go up to the Great Wall that next morning, as well as another group to go golfing. I called one of the friends of mine who worked at the university and was in charge of the transportation, had lined up the cars and to confirm the drivers that were available for us the next morning. But I was told at 11 o'clock that evening that they saw tanks proceeding towards the square, and that they saw truckloads of military troops armed with machine guns and so on. And he said chances are things might turn ugly tonight. So I promptly called Anne and told her that in case if things turn nasty, for her not to worry, because we are quite far from the square, and that we are safe in a safe location. And if things did work out, we would leave Beijing as soon as we could get tickets out. And so Anne had prior notification. Next morning at 5 o'clock, I went to the streets because that's about the only way you can get any information. And I went out to the streets and talked to people who were gathered in the street corners, trying to figure out what happened the night before, because there was a total news blackout and we didn't have any shortwave radio, so we had no idea of what had taken place. We suspected things might have turned nasty that evening. What I learned in the streets literally shook me to my very roots. The numbers given by students were at that point were about 3,000 to 5,000 students and Beijing residents being slaughtered at the square. And it was really difficult to even comprehend the magnitude and the brutality with which the massacre took place. We could hear gunfire in the night, throughout the night, because we were about 2.5, 3 miles north of the intersection where a lot of the fighting took place. To even try to comprehend the magnitude of the killing was just something which we found it quite difficult to accept, simply because we were deprived of the images that you folks could see stateside on the TV screen in full color, because we were really literally under a news blackout. The only thing I could find out was when I called Anne to confirm the stories that I had gotten in the streets. And what she told me was something which was quite, at a point, they confirmed what I picked up in the streets, and it was very, very troubling. And the next 2 days, the hotel that I stayed really became a den of foreigners gathering together, because reporters that stayed at the Shangri-La were rounded up. Some of them were taken away, and others were taken off and went over to the hotel we were staying. So we were able to find out then more of what was happening.